Just a few preliminary points. You will get a PDF copy of the slides, so you'll have them for reference. And then there are two papers in the handouts. One is on the ethics on employing competent and reasonable safeguards, which is the ethics requirement. The second is on cybersecurity basics. That's the practical part of what we need to do to comply with the duties. So I'm going to cover 5 topics today, starting with the threats, looking at the environment facing law firms today. Second, attorneys' duties to safeguard information relating to clients and other kinds of confidential information. And then the next 3 sections will cover how to comply with the duties, looking at an overview in Cybersecurity 101, some of the basic safeguards, and then looking at some of the specific threats we have today. I have a lot of slides. I may not get through all of them. If I don't, the material is all in the written materials, so whatever I don't get through in the slides, you'll have the slides to view and also written materials to get the details. So we're going to start with today's threats to law firms, and unfortunately, they're high and growing. I'm going to start with just 2 quick articles. This is from November of last year, and it points out how law firms and law departments are being targeted. And 2 of the greatest threats are ransomware and business email compromise. Everyone pretty much knows what ransomware is today. The bad guys encrypt data and then want ransom payment to get the decryption key. The second step of that is becoming more frequent is, in addition to encrypting the data, they steal it and want extortion payments so they won't sell or release it. Business email compromise is another great threat to law firms. That's using fraudulent emails, often taking over a law firm's or clients or someone else in a transaction's email system and sending emails that come from legitimate addresses, trying to steal information or to do something like getting fraudulent wire transfers. These are probably the 2 greatest attacks hitting law firms today. All right, another article from just last month, and it points out that through the end of May, that it's on track to set a record for the number of law firm data breaches that are reported. And unfortunately, looking back at the last several years, attacks on law firms have either been steady or increasing, often increasing, but they haven't been decreasing. And going back to the original poll, they are hitting firms of all sizes. And solos and small firms are now targeted as much as law firms, often because they don't have as robust a security as some of the larger firms. So the ABA does a legal technology survey every year and publishes reports on it. And in the intro, he mentioned that I wrote the tech report a couple of the years, which is a summary of this survey for attorneys. And it's been pretty constant over the last several years. There's a question, has your firm ever experienced a data breach? So that's ever, not just in the past year. And it's been steady around 29 to 30%. This survey is directed to attorneys. There have been some other smaller surveys directed to IT professionals, and they generally report a higher percentage of law firms that have experienced breaches. So it's a pretty high number that we need to deal with. So some more numbers that are important in understanding the threat and how to defend against them are that over 90% of successful cyber attacks start with a phishing email. So if attorneys are aware of emails and employ technical and procedural defenses against them, it's hitting a high percentage of the attacks. This figure comes from CISA, which is the Cybersecurity and and Infrastructure Security Agency that's part of Homeland Security. The other stat is that about 68% of breaches include a human element. emphasizing the importance of training and cybersecurity awareness as part of defense. This is from Verizon. It has an arm that does cybersecurity consulting and breach response, and every year it publishes a data breach investigation report that summarizes, what's happened and the lessons learned from it. So, these are important numbers in terms of developing a cyber defense. All right, so I'm only going to spend a minute on AI. I saw that you did have another webinar on AI, but AI has been used in cyber defense and by attackers for years now. Just like in many other areas of technology, it's not something new. But what changed is last year when generative AI started to hit the market, and that's the AI that can create text and images and sounds and videos, and it can even do coding. So the cybersecurity service providers are using Gen AI for defense. Microsoft just recently released its Copilot for Security, which is a Gen AI security tool that works with other existing cybersecurity tools. But it's also being used for attack. And attackers have their own variations like Hack GPT and Evil GPT that they're using for attacks. One of the things that they're doing is generating very convincing emails. It eliminates some of the awkwardness, the typos, the poor language that sometimes were telltale in older phishing attacks. And they can also translate them very rapidly and accurately into multiple languages. And just an example, this isn't a law firm, but this was a company based in England, and one of its finance employees in Hong Kong got a message to make a $25 million wire transfer. And the attackers used a deep fake Zoom meeting. It would be like this, instead of me speaking, was a AI creation of me. And in that, the chief financial officer confirmed the message that the $25 million payment should be made, and the employee in Hong Kong made it. So, that's using Gen AI to create a video in a Zoom meeting that was all fraudulent. So that's how bad it can get. And it just confirms the importance on things like wire transfers of confirming changes, and particularly or confirming payment instructions, and particularly changes in payment instructions through other communication channels that are legit. All right, so that's a quick view of the environment that law firms are facing now. Next, I'm going to turn to attorneys' duties to safeguard information relating to clients, as well as other kinds of confidential information. So there are 4 sources of our duties. First is the ethics rules, and if attorneys violate them, they're subject to a disciplinary action. Next is common law, and a violation of those can lead to a malpractice or professional liability action. Next are contracts, particularly clients in regulated industries are now more frequently having specific contractual cybersecurity requirements for their attorneys. And finally are laws and regulations. Those generally deal with defined kinds of personally identifiable information, but they apply to attorneys as well as others. Another category I don't have here is we're now starting to see some court orders that are confidentiality orders and protective orders in litigation that, in addition to limiting sharing of the information, also provide for security and require notice in the event of a breach. So it's important to understand that these sources of duties set minimum standards, and conduct below them can be unethical or unlawful. And the goal in practice should be aimed to be well above these minimums as a matter of client service and sound professional practice. All right, so turning to the specific ethics rules, there are three and then a group that apply. First is Rule 1.1 on competence, and that requires attorneys to have and maintain competence in the law and in its practice. The comments to Rule 1.1 provide that includes understanding the risks and benefits of relevant technology. So it specifically applies to our use of technology. Next is Rule 1.1 on communication. It requires communication with the client about material aspects of the relationship, and it can so something like using AI, it probably requires communicating with the client about it and perhaps getting informed consent from the client. Significantly, it also requires, in the event of a compromise or loss or compromise of the confidentiality of client information, it requires notifying the client what has happened. 1.6 is confidentiality of information. It requires attorneys to take reasonable efforts to prevent inadvertent access to confidential information and to protect against unauthorized access to it. So that's the protection against hacking. And finally, 5.1 and 5.3 require supervising attorneys to ensure that everybody within the law firm, whether they're attorneys or others, and everyone outside the law firm working for them, provide their services in a way that is consistent with the attorney's ethical obligations, including communications and confidentiality. So how do we comply with this duty of providing competent and reasonable safeguards? There's three ways to do it, and this is true in a lot of the ways that we get involved, whether it be getting into a kind of litigation we're not familiar with, or litigating over a new product or new technology. And it's straightforward. Either know it, learn it, or get qualified help. And it's important in cybersecurity that any consultants be qualified, not only in IT generally, but also in cybersecurity. Some firms are using what is called a managed service provider to help with this. They actually remotely manage the security or the whole suite of technology that attorneys are using. So those are the duties and how to comply with them. I'm going to wrap up this section just identifying three ABA ethics opinions. Now, these, of course, are from the ABA, so they're profession-wide, both for the ethics rules and for opinions. It is, of course, important to understand the ones in the jurisdiction or jurisdictions in which you're practicing, not just the ABA guidance. So the first ABA opinion is 477R from 2017. It deals with electronic communications, and it moved from some of the earlier opinions that were less strong in requiring things like encryption. And this opinion says that at least for some types of sensitive communications, encryption or other types of protection is required. 483 deals with data breaches. It requires attorneys to exercise reasonable efforts to prevent a breach, to monitor for breaches, to detect and recover from them. And as I mentioned before, if there's a material loss of information or compromised information, it requires under Rule 1.4 to notify the client. And the final one is on virtual practice. and it pulls everything together with some discussion of some specific technologies. So it is a very helpful one. These are discussed in the written materials and summarized in a little more detail than I just had time to cover. All right, so we've looked at the threat environment and attorneys' duties to safeguard. Now we're going to look at the high-level Cybersecurity 101, kind of the umbrella of the principles that apply. Before I move on, okay, I see we don't have any questions at this point, so I will keep moving. All right, so attorneys should have a comprehensive cybersecurity program. And that's true whether you're a solo practitioner or you're in one of the AmLaw 100s or 200 biggest firms in the world. But ABA guidance says that the program should be appropriately scaled to the size of the practice and to the sensitivity of the information. So a solo might just need a couple or a few pages, with kind of an outline that they work with their IT people on or their IT consultants. For larger firms, it can be something rather lengthy and detailed. It should be risk-based. And the comments to Model Rule 1.6 go into some of the factors that are determined in a risk-based program. Importantly, it should address people, policies and procedures, and technology. It's not just technology. And a lot of people, both attorneys and others, mistakenly think that cybersecurity is primarily technology. It's a critical part, but going back to the earlier slide with the phishing and the human element in breaches, if you don't address the people part with training and security awareness, technology very well may fail. So training is important. The program needs to be periodically reviewed and updated. And again, constant security awareness. One critical thing to take away from this presentation is that constant security awareness all the time is just a critical part of cyber defense. All right, so this is a checklist of what should be in a comprehensive cybersecurity program. I don't have time to go into the details, but this is in the written materials. So even a small firm should look at this, talk to whoever's providing your IT support, and make sure that you are addressing these elements. And I have a caution at the bottom for checklists, and that's important. Some cybersecurity attorneys and consultants don't like using checklists. I do. I am a big fan of the book, The Checklist Manifesto. I use them a lot. But you have to be careful in cybersecurity because it's not just check it off and forget it, set it and forget it. You can use a checklist to make sure you cover everything, but the last item in that list at the bottom, you have to go back and periodically review and update it. It's not just, check it off once and you're done. So a cybersecurity program is best based on a standard or a framework. So instead of looking at different types of security on an ad hoc basis, like looking at passwords and antivirus software and things like that, it's best to use a framework, either to completely comply with it or to use a guide. So the first two are from NIST, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, that's part of the Department of Commerce. ISO is the International Organization for Standardization. It has a series of very detailed cybersecurity frameworks. The Center for Internet Security is a nonprofit that publishes what are called the CIS controls, which are a list of specific coordinated cybersecurity controls. And finally, ILTA, which is the International Legal Technology Association, has a legal sec initiative that takes these kinds of standards and translates them for the legal profession. So these can be very complex and overwhelming for a small firm, which we see is the majority of our audience. So fortunately, there are some more succinct approaches for them. So I mentioned the NIST cybersecurity framework. It is a set of now 6 functions. It used to be 5, but it includes govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And those are the steps for cybersecurity. And version 2.0 was just released in February. And at the bottom right, there is a quick start guide for small businesses. So that's the kind of thing that a small firm can use with whoever's providing your technology or IT support to use it for your purposes. All right, and the CIS Controls has just published an implementation guide for small and mid-sized enterprises, and it has a series of worksheets that can be used to implement it for small and mid-sized enterprises. And just a couple more sources. The ABA Cybersecurity Legal Task Force that I served on in the past has a website with cybersecurity resources for small law firms to links to the ones that I just pointed out, as well as some more information tailored to them. And CISA has a website with resources for small and mid-sized businesses. So, small firms don't need to go into the complexity of the standards and frameworks that I mentioned that mid-sized and larger firms should be looking at, and has tailored resources so that you can make sure that your cybersecurity program is comprehensive and coordinated. Okay, let's see, have a question? All right, so the question is, what does a solo practitioner who doesn't have any IT support do? Is hiring an IT consultant necessary to comply with ethical requirements? Either learning the cybersecurity yourself or getting help is important. You don't necessarily have to hire a consultant to come in and take over the whole thing. But what do you do for setting up your technology generally? What do you do if you have an issue, a problem with technology? You can get a limited amount of help. You can use resources like these that I went through if you want to learn and understand it. I can't say that you absolutely, to comply with ethical requirements, have to hire an IT consultant, but you probably need some kind of help. It can be from checklists, it can be from written materials, but most attorneys will at least need some help. All right, so the last thing is having an incident response plan, and everyone should have one. Again, even a solo. But for a solo, it might be a page or a couple pages of who to call for what. If you have a data breach, particularly if it's over the weekend or on a Friday evening, who are you going to call? If you have cyber insurance, where's the contact information, either to get hold of your broker or to report it to the carrier? What law enforcement are you going to call? There's something I'll talk about later called IC3. It's an FBI group called the Internet Crime Complaint Center. Be ready to notify them. So again, it's all scaled to the size of the practice and the sensitivity of the information. And in response to the question, one additional point, if you are even a solo and you're advising high profile movie stars or sports figures or something like that, you probably do need a cybersecurity consultant. So it depends, on the size and the sensitivity of the information. All right, so now I'm going to turn to practical safeguards. Could we have the second polling question? All right, so this is, do you use Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, both or neither? So I'll give you a minute to answer that. All right, so we have a lot using either Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, or both. Uh, Both of them can be highly secure and often more secure than a solo or small firm can do by himself or herself. But you have to look at the security of it and make sure that you set it up correctly. For instance, I'll be talking about multi-factor authentication later, but Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace both offer multi-factor authentication, but at least so far it's been optional and you have to turn it on, which is something you should do. They're talking about making it mandatory. All right, so I wrote an article a couple of years ago for Law Practice Magazine, and they asked me to pick a number of basic safeguards. So I picked 10. And that's not magic. You could come up with 8 or 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever. But these are 10 basics that are covered in almost everyone's list of what everyone should do for their cybersecurity. Again, a question about checklists. And also I want to point out that there's more details about each of these in the written materials with some links to locations to get some more information. All right, so Microsoft does a cyber defense report every year, and for the last couple of years, it has reported that basic security hygiene can protect against 98% of cyber attacks. Now, what Microsoft defines as basic security hygiene goes beyond some of the things that I have in my list on the earlier slide, but we'll go through and talk about them. But they are the ones that a lot of people aren't using yet are becoming basic. So one's multi-factor authentication, another one is zero trust principles, another one is using modern security software and anti-malware, keeping everything up to date, and then protecting data. And we're going to look at each of these in the following slides. All right, so first is to manage and minimize your data, because if you don't know what you have and where you have and where it is, you can't protect it. And one of the biggest challenges that we have when we're called in to assist with a data breach is understanding what technology and data the victim has and where it's located. And oftentimes we'll have to do that on the fly as part of the breach response. The more of that you can have in advance, the easier it is to both protect it and to deal with it if there is an incident. Next is to classify the data. And that means to take at least the most sensitive kinds of information, like social security numbers, trade secrets, things like that. Make sure you know exactly where it is, and it is protected beyond routine everyday data. Next is to minimize collection and retention. If you don't need it, don't collect it and retain it. Next, segment and limit access to highly confidential information. Does if you're representing a company in IP litigation, does a receptionist need access to that information? Or does a receptionist need information to tax information if you have a tax or trust and estate practice? And finally, secure disposal. When you no longer need it, that's either shredding it or wiping it securely electronically so it can't be retrieved. So again, if you know where it is and protect it, you're way ahead in both cybersecurity and in breach response. All right, so next is zero trust, and Microsoft now considers this to be basic. It's a new approach to security. It overlaps with the last slide. But first, this segmentation of data, keeping the data in different compartments. That could be different files, different folders, depending on its sensitivity. Next is least privilege, particularly as organizations get larger, making sure that only people who have a need to access highly sensitive and confidential information have access to it. Next is strong authentication, like multi-factor authentication. I'll cover in another slide. And then zero trust continually verifies users and devices that are accessing it. So zero trust is being implemented in government agencies and large and mid-sized law firms and organizations, but options are starting to become available for small and mid-sized firms. So it's something to watch for in security if you're in those categories. All right, so accounts. Both in Windows and in Mac OS, there are two types of user accounts. There's an administrator account and a regular user account. And an administrator can do anything like installing software, changing configurations, and things like that. A regular user generally can't. So for everyday use, it should be a regular user account, and you should be in an administrator account only when you're going to do something for which that is necessary. So, for instance, I'm in a law firm. I have regular user access. I don't have administrator access, so my firm's IT has to get in to do the things that are for administrator. On my personal laptop, I keep it in a regular user account for routine use. If I'm going to change configurations, add a device, do security updates, I just have to log in with my administrator password. I then can do it and then go back to regular user. If you're working at home on a shared computer that other family members have access to, it's highly recommended that you have at least 3 accounts: an administrator account just for making changes, a user account for household members, and then a second user account that you use for legal related work. So that's user accounts. All right, next in authentication is passwords and passphrases. So the current recommendation is a minimum of 12 to 14 characters using a mix of capital and small letters, numbers, and symbols. It's also recommended that you use a different password or passphrase for every account that you're going to use. Now, that's really complex and hard to do. One way to help deal with that is to use a passphrase. Something like this, it's fairly easy to remember, and you can use variations for different accounts. So the National Institute for Standards and Technology a couple of years ago pointed out that it is more important to have length than complexity. Complexity is good, but length is more important. All right, so multi-factor authentication, I talked about that before. Most people know what it is now. Microsoft has reported that multi-factor authentication blocks 99.9% of account takeover hacks. Now, that's just account takeover. That's a subset of all attacks, but that's where someone gets your username and password, but they need another form of authentication to get in. Sometimes text messages are used. That's the weakest form of multi-factor authentication because people can sometimes get access to your cell account, but it's much better than not having multi-factor authentication. The one shown here is one called Duo Security. There's other ones, but instead of having to copy a number, you just hit a check, yes, it's me, or an X on the app, and that provides the multi-factor authentication. So another way to comply with all the requirements in an easier to use way is to use a password manager. So a password manager is an encrypted locker on your computer where you use a strong passphrase or password to get into it, and then it stores all of your other passwords. There have been a couple instances where password locker service providers have been hacked, but I'm not aware of any where they have actually been able to get everybody's protected passwords. So that's a good tool. And I don't have a recommendation for any particular technology in these sessions. These are some of the common ones. All right, so there is a new ball game in town called a passkey, and this is something to learn. I don't have time to go into it in detail, but it's been developed by a group called the FIDO Alliance, which is not a nonprofit that all the major tech companies belong to. And Microsoft has a short video that's under 4 minutes that explains how passkeys work. There's a link here and there's a link in the written material. But basically what it is you have your computer on the left here in the screen, and you log into it in a secure way, most securely using a fingerprint or eye scan or facial recognition. It has an encrypted private key for each website or service that you're going to use. And only you have access to it, no one else can. On the right is the website or service that you're trying to access. It has a public key that matches your private key, but you can't get on the site without the private key. So if somebody breaches the site or the service and gets your password, they have it. If they get the public key that's matched to your private key, they can't do anything with it. You can't reverse engineer it. So unless they get the private key from your device, they can't get into it. And Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Apple, all the common service providers are starting to move to it. I have not tried it yet. I am going to do it. It's just been available on some of them for a month or so, but it's something to keep up with. And it's very secure, particularly because it's tied with multi-factor authentication. All right, staying current. This is a real challenge, but when flaws are discovered in software called vulnerabilities, attackers can often exploit them to get by security. And it's really an arms race between the bad guys finding vulnerabilities, finding out how to exploit them, the company that develops the software learning about that, coming out with patches and getting people to install them. That there have been a lot of major data breaches where updates or patches are available to protect against exploits, but they just haven't been installed. And Microsoft comes out the second Tuesday of every month. We just had one yesterday with what's called Patch Tuesday, and it has the updates. It's important to do it for the operating system, whether that be Mac or Windows, and for all your software. So it's a challenge to do it. It's best to upset to enable auto updates, and it's best, if you don't know how to do it yourself, to have an IT consultant periodically make sure that your firmware is updated. That's the embedded software in computers and devices that actually run the computer, and security updates periodically are published for that. All right, so using common secure configurations, this is another checklist, but it's setting up everything on each individual computer and server to make sure it's secure. And Apple and Microsoft both publish information on how to do that. A lot of times it's not in the quick start guide because they often put ease of use ahead of security. So it's important to make sure that everything is set up securely. If you need help, get it. But NIST publishes secure baselines. Microsoft publishes them. The Center for Internet Security publishes them. So there's a lot of sources. Okay, so there's another poll, and I think I have to wait till we get by that. All right, so using security software. Again, it's really important. And yes, if you have a Mac, you need security software. Again, I'm not recommending a particular product, but these are some of the more common ones. And there's a move. This is, again, one of Microsoft's now considers basic of extended detection and response, which is really an antivirus software on steroids, much more powerful. And it's called XDR for short. And there are XDR products becoming available for solo and small businesses. So it's something to look at upgrading. All right, having a backup. This is really important to protect against ransomware and to protect against just equipment failures. One approach is called 3-2-1, having a minimum of 3 backups on 2 different kinds of media and at least 1 off-site. So these are some of the other guidelines for it. But if you have backup, test it, make sure it works. Don't just assume it'll work. And don't assume that cloud service providers will back everything up. Sometimes it's optional. Sometimes you have to turn it on. So backup is important to protect against at least one of the arms of ransomware, but also for equipment failures. All right, so having spam filtering and protecting Outlook or Google email inboxes. There's settings to go in and do that. This one happens to be Microsoft's instructions for setting it up. There are add-on products that you can get that are more robust, but within Gmail and Microsoft's Outlook email, there are settings that you can set up to be more secure. You do have to monitor your spam folder. There have been court cases where messages from court and e-filing systems have gone to spam and attorneys haven't found them. And the courts have held that's your risk. You have to understand how spam filters work and you have to check what's quarantined. All right, so vulnerability assessments and remediation. This is now becoming basic. So there are 2 types. One is external and one is internal. The external, a service provider can scan a law firm or other businesses' connections to the internet and look at insecure devices that face the internet look at open ports where an attacker can get in and manage them that way. The internal looks at computers and servers, devices within the system, and looks for vulnerabilities. So the internal has to be done by IT or a service provider. The external can be done by others. CISA actually has a free cyber hygiene service that they will do external scans and give you a report so you can tell if there are any issues. There are a couple of cyber insurers that are now using external scans as part of their underwriting process to make sure they know what vulnerabilities a law firm or other insured may have before they write the policy. And some are offering it as a risk management service during the term of the policy, where they'll periodically run external scans and advise the insured of the results. All right, so that is the basics, and I'm going to spend the time that we have left on looking at some of the specific threats and ways to protect against them. There's a couple more questions. I'm going to save those for the end when we get to the question period. So let's run the last poll now. And this one is, do you work primarily at home, primarily in the office, or about 50-50? And while the poll is being answered, if you are working primarily at home or even 50% of the home at home, there's some safeguards you should have with your home network and how everything is set up. Being careful with paper that it gets shredded, making sure you have secure wireless and things of that nature. In the paper, there's some links to some checklists for secure at home. So it looks like we're just about half at home most of the time, half in the office most of the time, and about 14% 50-50. All right, so there are different concerns with them, and if you're working at home, making sure that you have a secure connection to the internet. If you're using wireless, you have secure wireless, and that you have proper security software. All right, so one of the common threats is insider threats. And again, going back to the slide that about 70% of cyber incidents involve a human element. A lot of those are insiders in a law firm. It can range from being dishonest or malicious to someone just being rushed, multitasking, and things of that nature. It's a pretty small percentage that is malicious or dishonest, fortunately, but that means that the higher percentage are people who are trying to do the right thing but make mistakes. So you want to vet new hires. That's for honesty. Having training, initial, periodic, and reminders. In a solo firm, that can be attending programs like this, reading some articles, from the ABA, from the Bar Association, things that cyber insurers publish, but having some way of keeping up to date. Monitoring employees if you're beyond a solo, and dealing with departing employees, particularly making sure that they don't have passwords, digital copies of files, and things like that. All right, so phishing and spear phishing, again, it's 90% of a successful attack starts with it. That there are three varieties. There's the routine phishing. Actually, there's four. There's spear phishing, which is targeted phishing. Instead of sending it out to everybody from a particular bank or cell phone provider or cable provider or something, it's targeted. There's smishing, which is using SMS texting, and then there's vishing, which is voice phishing. And from what I've been seeing and reading lately, that there is a high number of vishing attacks where someone will impersonate a client or someone you do business with, or someone in your law firm on the phone, and try to talk information, passwords, and things like that out of them. So it has you click on a link, open an attachment, visit a malicious website, enter information. This is what you have. Now, I see we're running out of time. Todd's going to come on in a minute. So I am going to jump through to two quick things. Number one, as part of your incident response plan, have information on the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, that's IC3. If you send a fraudulent wire transfer, in addition to notifying your bank, get online and notify IC3, get the bank numbers and everything in there. If they get the information timely for domestic banks, they have a 75% success rate in stopping the transaction. And then finally, constant security awareness by every user, every day, every time they use technology. Think before you connect, click, or act. This is the constant to best protect against cyber attacks and losses. All right, so that's all we have time for. I'm going to turn it over to Todd, and then we'll go into the overtime for questions and answers.
All right. Well, we could have kept going on this one. This was really great information. I normally I don't do this, David, but I want to ask for the benefit of our audience here. There's a fairly new scam technique or cyber technique where I've heard that you'll get a phone call from somebody and no one will be on the other end of the phone call. And as soon as you speak to the effect of, hey, anybody there? Hello, hello. They are recording your voice. Then they get it through an AI, generative AI process to create speech from you, which is used now or then to authenticate certain websites that are out there that use voice recognition for you to get access to your own account.
Yes, I have seen some of it, and it's one of the weaknesses in using voice identification as an authentication method. You should at least have multi-factor authentication where there's something beyond voice that the attacker would have to get. Right. But those kinds of calls, or even going into YouTube or TikTok and getting people speak. Like if I'm an attacker and I'm going to call someone at your company to try to impersonate you, if I have access to this webinar, I get you talking in this to train my evil
twin.
and create you. But if I get you giving a public statement, a marketing one, or something like that, it's one of the dangers of social media.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's plenty of potholes and traps and everything else. So before I conclude, I do want to say that you pointed out a couple of things in your webinar and in your content where it wasn't surprising to hear that 30% of law firms experience data breaches, 90% have experienced cyber attacks, and which start with a phishing email. So the moral of the story is we all need to take these threats seriously and invest in training and stay aware of the ever-changing landscape of cyber threats, right? And especially as generative AI gets involved or gets more and more integrated. All right. So before we sign off, I'm going to let you know that we're going to be hanging around for another 10 or 15 minutes. And other than that, this webinar is concluded. Thank you for attending.
All right. So we have a few questions that are in the queue. So let me go to them. One asks about VPNs and browsers. And I don't recommend specific products. I mean, some of the time I'll do that offline, in an email, but for the general audience, as far as VPNs and browsers, just do some research and go to some of the cybersecurity sites. Like there's CSO Online for Chief Security Officer Online, even ones like CNET. Look at their reviews, but find a reputable source. Even the New York Times Wirecutter has some things. So make sure you're looking at a reputable source, not just something that's on the eNet or on the internet, and look at their recommendations. As far as browsers, I don't have a recommendation for one of the listed ones. The most important thing on browsers is to make sure that it is up to date. Set up automatic patching and install updates. For instance, Chrome earlier this year has had several vulnerabilities that was quickly fixed, but you have to apply the updates. All right, so next is, should you use different computers, one internal only and one connected to the internet? Most people don't do that. It's uncommon. For things that are highly confidential, trade secrets, things like that, you might want to go the extra step. That's not commonly done. But the important thing is making sure that you have a secure connection to any site or services that you're using, and that you have a firewall. So there's a hardware firewall that with most internet service providers, comes as part of your modem. Make sure you have that. And then a software firewall that's on your computer. That comes with Windows, it comes with Mac, you have to turn it on. For 1 to 5 attorneys, again, do I recommend an antivirus or malware? Again, I don't recommend particular products, but look for the reviews and those types of sources that I looked at before. One of the things that I caution against, and most others in my position, is don't use the free antivirus products. Use an enterprise one. They're not all that expensive, and they're generally more secure. One that since it's built into the operating system, Windows Defender, a lot of people recommend because it comes with Windows, and it was kind of light when it first came out. It's been getting some more reviews, but for VPNs and browsers and security software, if you do some research on basic sites and document that you've done it, if you have an IT consultant, ask for his or her opinion, then you're doing your due diligence for ethical reasons. All right, the bare minimum for a senior lawyer, I think it's following the basic recommendations. You may not, want to go to the extent of using a framework or standard. That's kind of complex, but at least be sure you've hit the basics, like having a strong password, multi-factor authentication if you're accessing Microsoft or Google or any practice management software, having security software, those kinds of steps. What should be in your engagement agreement with a client about use of AI, generative AI, cloud services and things. I have not studied AI enough, and there are two pretty important aspects of it. Number one, as I mentioned, AI has been used in cybersecurity for years, and it's been used by Lexis and Westlaw and things of that nature. Spell check editor in word processing uses it. Those kinds of AI, you probably don't need to disclose. If you're going to use generative AI, I haven't studied enough to give you my opinion. The ABA has a cybersecurity task force that's starting to develop that kind of information. But I would think you at minimum want to get informed consent from a client if you're going to use generative AI for their services. All right. Any further questions? Did I get them all?
There's one that just came in about untangle.
Yeah, I am not familiar with Untangle. I mean, I've seen references to it, but I have not used it.
Me either.
But if you're going to use something new like that, make sure that there are reviews by reputable tech websites or tech writers. Don't just use marketing hype. All right, in terms of documentation, I just think having a written cybersecurity program that again might be a couple pages for a solo or small law firm, but by keeping a record in writing of the security decisions that you're making. You can use the kind of checklist that I have, understanding their limitations, but at least having them to document, I went through this or I went through this with my IT service provider to make sure that I've addressed everything. I mean, one of the sayings in cybersecurity, particularly as we're seeing enforcement actions by agencies like the SEC against corporate security officers and things, is that if you don't document it, it didn't happen.
Okay, no more open questions. David, time to sign out. Did a wonderful job. Thank you.
Okay.